Can you all hear me? Salma, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Could you just go ahead with introducing yourself so that we can before we get Natalia up in here?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Salma Alam-Naylor. I am a developer experience engineer at Netlify. I do a lot of live streaming, building stuff and coding and programming, and I work a lot with serverless functions and edge functions on Netlify. And I've done quite a lot of talks and made quite a lot of content about it, teaching people how to use it, enabling people to use it and why you would use it as well. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you, Salma. So yes, let's go with Savannah. Can you please introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, what you do.
Yeah. Thanks for hosting. I'm Savannah Ostrowski. I am an engineer who has been working as a product manager on developer tools for the last couple years. I currently work on the Azure Developer CLI and cloud native workloads on Azure. Before that, I was working on Python language tooling and VS Code, Visual Studio, and on Azure. And before that, I used to do engineering stuff all over the place. But yeah, super excited to be here. I think this is like a great roster of folks. And I guess like a fun fact about me is that I have 3 cats named after foods.
Awesome. What are the names?
Yeah, they're all named after Japanese foods. So I have miso, nori, and momo.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
I do not know those food, but that sounds amazing.
I just remembered I forgot to give a fun fact. I'm sorry.
Yeah, what's your fun fact?
I used to be a comedian.
Oh my gosh.
Oh no.
A musical comedian. I did like funny, in air quotes, songs.
That's amazing.
Wow. That's amazing, Salma. Thanks for sharing. So yeah, we have everybody here except gifts. That's 90% of the speakers. So let's go with Marcia. Can you please unmute your mic? Tell us who you are, what you do. Fun fact.
Hey, hello. Thank you for inviting me. Think the fun fact is that we have maybe all the female Uruguayan serverless representation in this panel, me and Natalia. So yeah, it's quite interesting. I'm work for Amazon Web Services, AWS. You will hear me saying that a lot. I'm a developer advocate for AWS in the serverless team. I do a lot on that space and event-driven architecture. So when we talk about how to build stuff, I will be talking about serverless as a platform and event-driven architectures as the architecture patterns. So happy to share everything I can. I've been doing this for over 8 years, so quite early in the space. So happy to share everything.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you so much. So we have Nitya. Nitya, nice for you to join us. Could you please unmute your mic, tell us who you are, and fun facts?
Sure thing. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Woohoo! Hi, everyone. My name is Nitya Narasimhan. I'm based in New York, and I'm actually a developer advocate on the cloud advocacy team at Microsoft, alongside 2 of the wonderful people here. Plus, I also see one of my compatriots, Dina, on the call, so this is awesome. A fun fact about me is because someone just mentioned entertainment, I was actually pulled on stage at a Blue Man Group concert, and people threw up on me, and that was the most fun I ever had in my life. That's the fun fact. In terms of what I do, I'm on the JavaScript advocacy team. I work with Natalia and Savannah and Dina, and really interested in getting more JavaScript developers to start using some of the capabilities of serverless in the cloud. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Nitya. And finally, we have Natalia, my co-host. Could you please tell us who you are, what you do, and fun facts about you?
Yeah, okay. So yes, I'm Natalia. I'm based out of Barcelona. I work in Microsoft Azure, leading the developer experience for JavaScript developers. And I think the fun fact is that I started as a front-end developer, as a web developer, quite some years ago. And today I was trying to do some CSS, and I got so frustrated because I have been working mostly with infrastructure and more low level stuff lately. That I used to be really good with CSS, and now I am like, oh my god, I don't know how to do this anymore. And yeah, that's the fun. That's a fun fact, I think.
Oh, thank you for sharing. I know after not doing something for quite a while, it's gonna be all novel to you. And even folks that still do CSS every day, they still have issues with this. So it's all right. It's totally
Yeah,
fine.
I think people underestimate CSS, but it can really kick your butt if you don't know how to do it right. So
Yep,
yeah.
it definitely can. So yeah, you all have heard we have amazing speakers here from Microsoft, AWS, Netlify. Like this is the serverless dream team, if I can say so. So I have a bunch of questions, and the way the spaces go is I start off with a question, then we could discuss organically, question this to other, or I can go over to my list of 20 questions I came super prepared. Or then after that, when the space is rounding up, we could bring folks from the listener section to come ask the speakers questions they have, and yeah, that's how we round off. So to kick things off, let's start with the ABCs and just define terms. So how we're going to do this, because we have a lot of amazing speakers on the subject. If you want to answer the question, you could raise your hand using the. So if you click on the love or the plus, there will be like a raise hand to your right. It's like it's separate from all the other emojis. So just raise your hand and I'll call on you, so we don't speak over each other. All right. So yeah, the first question is, what is cloud native and why is it important? Because I think let's start from cloud native, then we'll move on to serverless. So yeah, who wants to go first? Okay, Marcia, please go ahead. You're muted, Marcia.
I'm muted. I do that all the time. Sorry.
Fine. Go ahead.
This is my definition, so don't quote me or quote me with my name. Of what is a cloud native application? It's an application that is built for the cloud, so it leverages services that are in the cloud as much as possible. So we have managed services that are provided by the cloud, and we use them and we embrace them, and we think about those services when we are architecting the application. For example, instead of building a full application, everything we do it ourselves, we take advantage of, okay, we are going to use serverless functions, we are going to use orchestration services like step functions to orchestrate our workflows, we are going to deep dive into our event-driven architectures using services like Event Bridge. So we take care of using those services as much as possible, and we plan for that when we are building those applications.
Nice. Thank you, Marcia. So from your definition, I am inferring serverless is part of the cloud native group of families. Is that what you infer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I can go into what is my definition of serverless if you want. It's something that it's automatically scale. You don't have to worry too much about infrastructure, so you don't need to configure networks or things like that. And you pay as much as you use, and then it's high available. So this is something very specific for AWS terminology. But for example, if you launch an instance, you have to define in which region, basically in which part of a in which availability zone, basically which part of the region you're launching that instance. When you're working with serverless services, it just works through the whole region. So it's high available in that sense.
Nice. Thank you, Marcia. Salma, please go ahead.
So one of the things that I think, so I'm a front end developer, and so I talk a lot to front end developers, and I kind of put it in their language. And I think one of the most powerful things about serverless is that it's not actually the absence of a server, which like the name suggests, and it's like it's a server that you don't need to worry about, like Marcia said. Like someone else owns the server somewhere in some server rack in some big air conditioned room, and you just use a server in that room whenever your code needs it. So back in the day, when in the early days of the internet, if you needed a server, you needed to like own one yourself in your house or your bedroom or your office, and you had to pay for the electricity for that server. You needed to manage the security of that server, and you needed to update the server whenever it needed new like security patches or whatever. But serverless is where you can make use of a server that someone else takes care of all that stuff with. You don't need to worry about it. And like Marcia says, it scales, the security is updated without you needing to worry about it. So you can just like focus on writing the code that you want to run on that server and not worry about all the infrastructure. It does come with a bit of a caveat though, is that if you need a persistently running backend, like to maintain state or anything like that, then you would need to use a different type of architecture, like a persistently running server. Then that's not really what we refer to as serverless, because serverless is like it scales up and it works when you need it, and it's not always on. So there's always that difference to maintain. Like basically, serverless is servers as a service.
Savannah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, both Marcia's and Salma's answers are great. I think just to kind of build on that is like, and I think Salma sort of hinted at this, is that because you don't have to think, or you're like, you don't own those servers, right? And because they are kind of, they can be kind of ephemeral in a lot of ways, there is like a lower cost in general for maintaining them in comparison to like, owning your own infrastructure, and lets you focus like more on what really matters to your customers, right? You can spend more time thinking about the user experience or kind of the business logic of your application, which I think I work in a space where I'm talking to a lot of application developers who are earlier on in their cloud native, cloud centric journeys, and a lot of them don't have that expertise on like, day zero. And so there is like a bit of a learning curve there, but I think the piece that's kind of the selling point for a lot of folks is just like the ability to spend more time on kind of what matters to them.
Thank you, Savannah. Mattia, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Last time I jumped in, I think it reset my hand. So my favorite audience of all is beginners and people who are absolutely new to the technology space and are wondering, hey, do we dip our toe in the water? And I really think cloud native is something that's going to be intrinsic to anyone who wants to get into technology and development. So the kind of way I like to think about it when I talk about serverless is really focusing on the less. And so if you followed me at all, I love visual storytelling. So the way I kind of think about it is focus on what less means when it comes to service. So it's really three things, right? It's less cost because this thing is running in the cloud and you're not owning all the infrastructure, you're not owning all the things. It'll only run when you need it on demand. You can use as little or as much as you want based on what you want to do. So it's about less cost to you. The second one is it's less management, to the point that Marcia was making, because you don't have to worry about this stuff. Someone else is taking care of it. But the third, which I like to say a lot because the generation gets it, is it's less FOMO. Because what happens is you no longer have to worry about buying the latest and greatest hardware or deploying the latest and greatest service. You're right. The cloud is just doing it for you. You just walk in and you're like, you've got the latest, iPhone. No, I'm kidding. I'm an Android person. So the thing I think about it is focus on the less. It means that it's going to cost you less, you manage less, you miss out on less. And that means that you can focus on building things that are actually going to help your users. And then I also wanted to kind of like go back to where you talked about cloud native, right? And again, the kind of familiarity of how should we think about cloud native? I always think about it in terms of focus on what native means. When I say native, it means I learn to talk fluently in the language of my origin, for example, right? So here, cloud native really is I'm hoping to inspire a new generation of people to say, we need to talk the language of cloud computing hardware and services and technologies. And so we really, really need to skill people into thinking about things in terms of cloud native artifacts, because then they'll stop thinking about it in terms of what do I do in my kind of organization, and thinking more about globe scale, right? Like, how do I deploy this so everybody in the world can use it?
Yes, awesome definitions and from different perspectives, all making this very amazing. So,
I I
um,
wanted to add,
Natalia, please go ahead.
yeah, I wanted to add something, Kelvin. It's very interesting because in my role and other people that do developer experience like me, we tend to interview developers a lot, and we ask them, the first question we ask them is, what is cloud native to you? And everyone answers something different. So this is also part of having an interpretation of such a massive offering that comes together with cloud native, right? What it means to you is probably aligned with what you use of it, and that's perfectly fine. So cloud native for a front-end developer may mean a platform that allows them to build and go live with a, I don't know, little configuration and little developer steps. And then for another person that is working with different technologies, it may mean something completely different. It may mean containers and orchestration and databases, and that's also perfectly fine. It's such a rich environment to build and to grow in, that it allows for many different interpretations even of the term, and that's wonderful. It's very diverse.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natalia. And I do agree because it's not just about hosting apps or your functions. There's a lot of components and offering for serverless and cloud native these days, and we're all going to get into all that. But so we've sort of answered my question number two, which is what serverless computing, how does it differ from traditional computing? So, but can we touch on that? Because what changed really? What is the key difference, which we've touched on, but can we just buttress like what were we doing with traditional computing before the advent of cloud native and cloud computing? Does anybody want to take that? Hands raised, or you could just unmute your mic and speak since we don't have no hands raised.
I think we're trying to be like really respectful of one another, but I really want to hear everyone's opinion on this. So maybe I'll just go and say, okay, Marcia, since you laughed, you're going to answer first.
Okay, Marcia, you
Okay,
ready?
I like that. Yeah, so traditional computing, I think it's at least what we will say, that do all the heavy lifting yourself. So I'm a developer for a million years. I look very young, but I started very young. But when I was doing code, you have to worry so much about so many bits and pieces. And then the second part was to deploy that. Sure, when you were working as a developer, somebody will give you a virtual machine in the and then it will work in that environment. Then you will need to put it somewhere in the cloud. If you were working in a traditional type of application in the cloud, there were so many people involved in deploying that security. If you were working in containers or operating systems or patching or load balancing and things like that. And as a developer, I was not able to do the end-to-end myself for a production application. It was just so much work and so many different things I needed to understand really well in order to do that. Then serverless happened, and I was from a developer that was doing Java, I turned into a full stack. I will call myself everything. I was able to deploy the application, code the application, put it in production, manage it. It had a lot of load, and everybody in my team was this type of full stack developer. We were very empowered to take the code, develop it, and put it in production, and being able to drive it through. And I think that's one of the biggest changes, the amount of empowerment that developers have, and the amount of focus that you can have in your project. No, like before there was so many other things in order to get this app to prod. Now you just focus on your code, you focus on what really makes you the money, what it makes you different, what it's the value that you're, and then the rest the cloud takes for you. So for me, that's the biggest difference with traditional development and serverless or cloud native.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Marcia. So we have Savannah. Please go ahead, Savannah.
Yeah, I think the advent of like cloud native and cloud native tooling has sort of shifted the developer experience paradigm in a lot of ways, right? Because a lot of the stuff that Marcia was mentioning, for developers that didn't have that background, there was like this, I have to translate these local components into something that works in the cloud. And so I think a lot of that developer experience sort of workflow is now sort of streamlined in a lot of ways. And in, I don't know, in modern times, in the modern times, I think cloud kind of comes up for a lot of people, even if they're not a cloud engineer necessarily. And so I think it's just like super, super prevalent. And so it's, in any workload, you really do have to think about it now.
Thank you so much, Savannah. Salma?
So when I first started getting into actual development, it was before I was officially in tech. It's when I was at university at music college. So another fun fact, my degree is in music. But anyway, so I started getting into it, and I had a boyfriend, right, who was a SharePoint developer, and he was teaching me like how to do basic HTML, CSS, and I was putting all of these files onto the internet via FTP, and so that's file transfer protocol. There was no like version control with Git at this point in my life, and there was all this stuff that he took care of, such as the server configuration and blah 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 blah, and I had no idea what that was about. And then when I like kind of started my first tech job, I was learning PHP. I was doing like full stack PHP in a very obscure PHP framework. And then I thought, oh, I want to try and put some of my own stuff online. I'll try a side project. And there was all of this weird, complicated stuff that I didn't know what to Google for or what to do, like HT access files and Apache configs for all this server stuff. And I had no idea how all of that stuff worked. I wanted to do front end. And so all of this like serverless stuff has enabled me as a front end developer to actually build, like what everyone was saying, full stack applications without all of that overhead knowledge that to be honest, don't care about. I don't care about my servers. I just care that they work and I can run my code on them. And what's also great is that as a front end developer, I've got, I mainly write JavaScript a lot of the time, and I can write serverless functions in JavaScript that I'm used to. I don't need to learn another language. I don't need to write back-end quote languages anymore. I can just write JavaScript or TypeScript and deploy it somewhere and it works. So really, as a front-end developer, I just think it's so powerful to expand your skills and to expand the possibilities of what you're able to do, all thanks to serverless.
Awesome points. Yeah. Itia, please go ahead.
Sure. Actually, the minute she said it empowers me to become like full stack, I was like, oh, yes, this is absolutely it. So to kind of give you a little bit of backstories, I actually came from research, but after I kind of left research, I spent a few years as an independent actually supporting small businesses. And I'm looking at serverless today thinking, oh my gosh, how many of these people can now take an idea they have and run it at scale without having to own all the infrastructure, without having to have built all the pieces they need, because they can interface to things, right? And so I kind of want to give a shout out to all the three of my colleagues on here because they've all taught me different things. Natalia is always about composability, and Savannah is always about developer experience, and Dina is always about maintenance, right? So what I want to highlight is APIs, right? I think the major thing that has been a game changer for many people is the fact that you can now build out your entire rich application without having to build everything by abstracting away things that you don't have time for, but you can potentially borrow from another team that has exposed an API against it, right? We all integrate with payment services, we all integrate with CMSs, right? So I think that the power of serverless and cloud native is the ability to have us kind of focus on the things we are good at and seamlessly integrate the things we are not yet good at or that have become commodity in a way that lets us actually deliver value to the end user, right? Because we all know this. We can build a million things, but we can't put it in front of a user and say, try it out and tell me if it works. It's really not worth anything. So to me, I think the great thing we're seeing is the shift towards APIs and microservices and all of that stuff. And architectural patterns should be super fascinating.
Awesome, Nitya. Natalia, do you want to say something on this?
Yeah, I think that that's part of what Nitya just mentioned about understanding how to architect your application and the artifacts, the components of it. This is what I was talking about at the beginning. The minute you go from, okay, I take what a platform as a service gives me, which is perfectly fine, but into a larger application and you need to scale, then you start adding more components and composing and scaling out and scaling up and all those things. You don't have to really worry about installing the software or calculating how much capacity that software needs to run. All those things allow you, again, like Nitya said, to focus on the application itself and what value you're going to provide to your customers or to the customers of your customers in the end. So that's a lot of work, and and I always like to talk from experience, because some people say like, serverless, it's really not the absence of a server in itself, and I want to stress that it's not the absence of a service. When I was an architect for MongoDB, my job was calculating the capacity a server needed to run a database depending on the workload. And it's not easy at all. There is a formula, like a mathematical formula, that you need to calculate the actual capacity of that server. It's not fun to lay it out, it's not fun to maintain it, it's not fun to make sure that it runs, that it fails over, that it's always available. So I think that we are really living in a great time for developers, where we don't have to worry about any of those things, because they are still done. We just don't have to do them anymore. And that's really great.
Yeah, I agree with all the speakers, because we've mentioned that serverless is not the absence of a server, and it's just the server you don't maintain, and it, you just use it via APIs or whatever the provider gives to you. So that's really amazing, and it just gives you this freedom to build anything you want and not worry about the infrastructure. So especially from the perspective of someone that knows, like, is coming from the web, from front end web, and you just want to build like a full application, you don't need to worry about the database management or the long running server backend. So it's just amazing. So do you have any um, questions for the speakers, Natalia, or should I go to question number 3?
Go to question number 3.
Oh, cool.
let's
Yeah, sure.
let's do it.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to go straight to the topic for this space. So what I know we've mentioned, of course, here and there. So, but now we're zooming into it. What benefits are there to learning cloud native and serverless skills as a web developer?
As a front end developer, as I always said, the biggest thing is that it upskills you by default. even if you don't need to learn about the whole server thing in order to deploy something to a serverless cloud place, you are by default, like by osmosis, learning how it's working, because there are things that you might not consider when you are writing your code. Oh, the big thing is, because I do a lot of work on edge functions as well as serverless functions. You then start to learn when you're working with serverless on the edge that actually servers are in a region, and they might need to be in a particular region to serve a particular audience. And that's why, like, the edge is good, because it automatically figures out where to serve your serverless function from. But I wouldn't have learned that serverless servers are in particular regions, and the edge network kind of solves that problem, if it can, without using serverless and the edge. And it's kind of opened up my world to how the world is so connected. It's a bit like I don't know whether many people are aware of this or know this, but the internet around the world is connected under the sea in huge cables, and this kind of thing you take for granted. And I think you know, obviously servers back in the day were in a fixed location in an office or a bedroom or a server room, you know. But serverless, you just learn about the infrastructure of the world as you use it. I think that's a great advantage.
Yeah, thank you, Summer. That's a very good analogy about this abstraction in the internet and how it marries to user serverless. I love it. Nitia, please go ahead.
Sure. I was actually like debating about whether I should bring this in because it's such a kind of like a hot topic, but also a sticky one. But let's be honest, AI is going to kind of like take over a lot of things, right? And if you want to work in that space, you can't do it without cloud. You can't do it without knowing how to store your models, deploy them, run them, understanding the cost structure, understanding how to monitor and analyze them for insights. There's a whole bunch of things you're going to have to do to become part of like the intelligent next generation of experiences, right? So to me, I think about it, at least I've been in industry for maybe like 2-3 decades now, right? And I've seen things come and go, and I've realized the only thing we can do to remain relevant is to constantly skill up. And if you look at it, we all need to pick up skills in cloud and AI. Because if you're going to build a developer experience, if you're going to build a business, if you're going to build a user facing, whatever it might be, site, app, whatever, you're going to need to talk the language. And I think that AI in particular is something that we should all be keeping an eye on, right? Because increasingly, it's not just about richer experiences, but it's about automation. And that means that like the developer experience and developer tooling, and how do we actually use things like Copilot, and how do we use things like, you know, I'm not going to say the words because it's all over the place, but how do we use those things to take away the mundane stuff, right? To automate the things that are familiar and start focusing on the things that are new and different and creative. So yeah, my 2 cents is get into cloud, pick up serverless skills, pick up cloud native skills, because you're going to want to do that if you want to work in the new kind of like intelligent ecosystem.
Wow. Like, I love the angle you come from. You know, we all, AI is the future and all that, and this stuff run on serverless and on the cloud. And if you, like you say, you have to upskill. So to remain relevant, you really need to learn this stuff. I love it. Okay. So, Marcia, please go ahead.
So I want to go back to the question that it's what skills um, people need, and I'm a very practical person, so I will give one skill that I think is sometimes we avoid when we start learning serverless or cloud native. The first thing we do as developers, we go to the console. And as developers, we like code. So I will encourage you to learn infrastructure as code first and learn the cloud and doing serverless directly from there. Why? Because first you're a developer, so you will feel a little bit more comfortable there. You will feel less kind of sometimes you go to the console and there is so much information and you will get confused and you will get overwhelmed. And then that's the way that production is built. So you will not need to learn two things at first. You learn the console and then, oh, this is not the real word to do it. Then you will need to learn infrastructure as code. So sometimes if you go to books or tutorials, everybody's teaching you from the console. No, go directly to infrastructure as code. If you're a developer, you will feel comfortable, learn Terraform or whatever cloud provider you are using, or like what is the best infrastructure as code for you. That's something you will need to research, but there's many out there, and start from there. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I love those 2 cents. Savannah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think like I think everyone's talked about different skills, but I think the thing I want to emphasize is that when you're starting your cloud native serverless cloud engineering journey, that there's like a lot to learn. And I think, any given tutorial or any given task that you're trying to accomplish kind of interacts with a lot of different technology. And I think that can feel sort of overwhelming when you're getting started. And so I think like I want to chime in and say like lean on the tools, like lean on tools to like get you started. Take it one day at a time, and like just start small. You don't have to boil the ocean or learn everything on day zero. And learn try and take it incrementally. As with anything in engineering, it's a lots of things are a pretty steep hill to climb. I don't think cloud native or serverless is any different, especially if you're not, coming from a background that maps with that paradigm. So yeah, lean on tools, lean on your editors. Yeah, that's basically my 2 cents.
Yeah, and Mitya has her hand up, but I wanted to add that, yeah, use the environment that is more familiar to you. And that's one of the advantages of the cloud as well, that typically you have many tools, some of them work on the cloud, that you are using every day. Like it may be your editor. So you don't have to switch context all the time or to think about how to leverage or how to get the most out of a tool if you already know how to use it. And many of these tools are wiring and are connecting to the cloud. So just learn how to use them to the most extent, and you're probably going to end up in the cloud one way or another. That's it. Yeah.
Sure thing. I was actually sorry for the echo. The school bus. I had to go open the door. So the thing I was actually going to point out is literally where we are, right? One of the most valuable things for me when I was trying to learn something new is community. To go out there, meet people who are in your level of experience or have expertise that you wish to have, follow them, talk to them, see what they're doing, ask questions, right? And I want to give a shout out to Code Newbie. If you're a newbie, follow the Code Newbie tag and go look at Codeland and conferences like that are very beginner friendly. But the flip side I want to also talk about is think about how you learn. So as an example, I learn visually. I like videos, I like pictures, but I also like to learn by breaking things down, reverse engineering them, right? So I think the question is, what kinds of content? There's not a one size fits all. Go look for the type of content or the type of learning path that's going to help you. And there are a lot of resources out there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Know how you learn and community and all. That's just amazing. Thank you so much to all the speakers. So we are going to go into. I have questions before this one, but this one is of more input to me right now. So yeah, what are common use cases for serverless computing? We've agreed that it's not ideal for all type of things, but what are the use cases? Like, can we just cite some examples? Who wants to go first?
I'll give you a a really cool use case for front end developers for edge functions on Netlify. I'm not here just to like shill Netlify, but this is what I've been doing a lot, and this is like what's really giving me the power to up my web development game. So I have so my website is like pretty much a static site. It's built with 11T. And Netlify edge functions are cool because you can add them to any framework on Netlify. You can add them as part of the framework. In some frameworks, they'll have support for like specific places, but otherwise, you can just add them alongside the rest of your code. And I use edge functions in particular in two really useful ways. One of them is localizing a page or what's the word, personalizing a page at the server level and not on the client. So for example, I have an events listing for things I'm doing, and rather than using client-side JavaScript to localize the dates and times in the person's time zone who is viewing the page, I do that on the server level, where the edge function intercepts the HTTP request to the page and then rewrites the HTML and sends it back. So even before it gets to the browser, the page has been transformed for that particular user. So it's better for performance. It's better for front end performance. So you're not sending so much JavaScript to the client, and it's like kind of quicker. And it means you don't get that flash of text that comes in after the content has been personalized. So there's that is really good for personalization at the server level without needing client-side JavaScript. And number two, I use it to on my homepage to when I'm streaming on Twitch to load in again at the server level like the latest Twitch thumbnail and the title to show you how the stream's progressing, to show you that I'm live. And again, this is all without client-side JavaScript. And I think in the front end space, there's a huge crusade to reduce as much JavaScript as possible on the client to improve performance and make the whole experience more accessible to more devices and on slower internet connections. So if you do this kind of transformation on the server where appropriate, it's got great performance benefits and allows you a lot more power actually than client-side JavaScript can give you in terms of localizing and personalizing.
Thank you so much, Sama. I'm an advocate of less JavaScript, so I love that use case. Marcia, please go ahead.
Yeah. So for me, serverless, at least how we envision serverless with serverless functions and all these more ephemeral compute and things like that, shines when we talk about event-driven architecture. So the idea of event-driven architecture is that there are events flowing around in the system and things are reacting when those events hit them. And when we think about the word is event driven, as Werner Vogels, our CTO, said. Basically, there are events everywhere. And when we think about the backend, we can have IoT, like Internet of Things, that is, our devices are sending events to the backend to do things. We can have a more like enterprise system where we have, I don't know, Salesforce sending an event when something is accomplished, or when we have a ticket open in Jira, it's sending an event to trigger something else, or when we have even a user doing some action like processing an order for a purchase. So there is so many events, and we can embrace these more ephemeral compute and the serverless actions itself when listening to this event and processing these events. So I think if you have an event-driven architecture and you have by nature events in your application, then you can take advantage of serverless by building things that react to those events instead of having a instance up and listening all the time, and then need to scale if there is more orders in your backend because somebody, I don't know, promotes you in Instagram, and that happens to many customers and smaller customers. For example, they have some small store, and then some big influencer for any reason shout out their handle in Instagram, and then they poof, their website collapses, and then they go and try serverless, for example, with Amplify or some other products, and then that can handle the load quite easily because that scales automatically and will increase with the amount of use you have. So there is, I think, event-driven architectures are one of the best use cases for serverless.
I have to agree, and I have to agree with the whole idea of events. And being a JavaScript developer, I don't think there is an architecture that is more suitable to connect the front end with the back end than event driven. So yeah, we're lucky to have it. We're lucky to live in these times again.
Yes, I love the use case, event driven. And okay, Nitia, please go ahead.
I'm talking too much, so I was trying to not say anything, but then she mentioned event driven, and that was awesome. So I was going to say that I think one of the most addictive use cases we've had is chaining workflows, right? And I just want to give a shout out not just to like pro devs, we're all JavaScript developers, we're all Python developers, we're all .NET, and, Rust, whatever. But there's a huge segment of the population that is what we're kind of thinking of as low code, which is they have great ideas, but they don't necessarily have very much of a hands-on coding experience. But serverless can still help them by allowing us to chain workflows. So there's a lot of platforms out there that do this. So I wanted to kind of highlight use cases where, for example, and a shout out to Gwyneth, one of the cloud advocates. I think her title is Made by GPS. But she had done this really nice demo where we showed how you can kind of look at license plates, capture them, put them into the cloud, have an AI run it and then detect what the license plate is, and typical toll booth kind of stuff, right? And that by itself is great, but here comes the low code part. You can chain that into a system that is data driven, like Power Platforms and Power BI, and actually kind of see visualizations of the data. You can set up alerts to say, send me email if my kind of like fine on the tollway has just exceeded $100, right? So to me, I think the biggest, most rare resource every single one of us has is time. Like we just don't have time to do all the things we want to do. So what I love about event driven, what I love about serverless is the ability to set up triggers, to set up workflows that automate, chain everything, and then boil up to us only the things that we need to know about when we need them, and kind of like take care of all the grunt work under the covers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. Thank you so much, Nitia. So automation and saving time and just all the pipeline stuff we do, CI, CV, whatever, visualization, all are very nice use cases for serverless. I love it. So I'm going to go to 4 more questions before we open up the floor. I know some folks are eager to ask questions. And yeah, so my next question is, what are the biggest challenges faced by developers in the adoption of cloud native and serverless technologies? What are the hurdles? Because of course there should be some. So what hurdles have you seen so far?
I think that one of the problems is, and we mentioned this before, that folks try to learn everything, and we have to think that cloud runs from infrastructure to front end, right? So there are many layers, many components, many types of architecture, so many different things you can do again on the cloud, because we were talking about execution context, like the functions, but there's also the databases, so the data persistence, and the APIs, so the data transfer. And there is so much to learn that sometimes you are not sure what exactly you need to have an application running. Again, you have to start with the very fundamentals and go slow and try to understand when a component applies to you or not, or your use case. And that's the key to succeed.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Please go ahead, Savannah.
Yeah, I think just building on what Natalia said, like there's the onboarding sort of like figuring stuff out, but then, as your application increases in complexity or fidelity, or maybe your requirements change because you have more people visiting your website, or, then there's also, some considerations that need to go into how you grow your app in the cloud. And I think a lot of that research that might be required to figure out kind of like what's the best configuration for a resource, or how to configure that is not clear. And you can read some tutorials and stuff, but I think sometimes that you'll end up with it depends on any set of factors. And so I think that the learning journey in kind of cloud native and serverless is never is never really done, which I guess is like kind of similar to all engineering work, but I think it just adds a little bit more complexity.
Yeah, and we finally had the it depends cliche. I love it. Marcia, please go ahead.
So going back to event driven as being for me the best case for serverless, I go to one of the biggest challenges of event driven, that is the asynchronicity of the events. So events are like herding cats when you are working with event-driven architectures. How you observe those events, how you know how that event is flowing end to end, as Natalia was saying, from the infrastructure to the front end, how you're handling that life cycle and making sure that everything is executing and like doing the right things. So that's one of the biggest challenges that a lot of customers are facing when they start their journey of like getting out from, we call it the Lambda lift, basically grabbing a Lambda function that is the AWS way of doing serverless functions and putting their code there. And then they start, okay, let's tracking different things and being a more cloud native, no, taking advantage of the different services and the different APIs. And then they face this, oh, all my events now are being called all in different times, and I need to handle the failures and the retries, and I need to figure out what happens in the SAT case, how I do queues to handle those fail events. So there is a lot of things that needs to be learned in the architecture of these applications.
Thank you so much, Marcia. So yes, the technical know-how I can see can be a hurdle. So you need to understand the event-driven architecture and all the intricacies of it. Sama, you want to chime in on this? Okay, go ahead.
A very alternative kind of viewpoint on this. In that, so your question was like, what are the hurdles? And I used to work for an agency, and we got a lot of different clients, and we got a lot of different types of projects, and a lot of the projects we would inherit. We would work with the existing tech that the client had, and we would, propose, okay, maybe we should do it this way. Maybe we should use more of a serverless architecture. You're using a very big monolithic application right now, and it's probably wise to invest in the future. But there's a lot of budget constraints with these types of projects, and having to work within an existing architecture and not being able to move forward because of those constraints. And that can be a very frustrating situation to be in as a developer and as a development team who wants to work kind of in a more forward thinking way. And so, unfortunately, all of us that we're talking, we're working in a very kind of privileged space, in the space of early adopters and innovators. But your average developer often doesn't get those opportunities to work in that kind of thing, in that kind of area. And so I would, that's why it's really important sometimes. I'm not saying as a developer go and spend all of your free time on learning serverless and doing side projects, but I think it could level you up as a developer and be able to give you the skills to contribute to those kinds of conversations, those architecture conversations to clients like that. And you could one day maybe be able to influence those types of decisions. But unfortunately, we're living in a world where serverless is not actually widely adopted right now. And it is still very new. And we have to sometimes remember that we are in a very innovative space that most of the tech industry has not yet got to.
Briefly, Barbara, just go straight to your question. That's the last question we're going to take, and we are done. If you have any other questions, everybody, please ask in the chat and tag the speakers.
Okay, thank you, Calvin. Thank you all for hosting this place. So I've like casually done like research on cloud native applications and serverless and just random readings, to be honest, nothing too serious. But like I've always had like this conception, which one of the speakers highlighted, that you necessarily do not have to be a cloud engineer in order to build cloud applications. So the second one is that I've seen this like in articles I've read, that cloud native applications do not have to run in the cloud. Please, I need a bit of clarification with that because I don't understand. Thank you.
Okay. Does any speaker want to answer that quickly? Cloud native applications don't have to run on the cloud.
I would need to read that article. I am a bit puzzled. So cloud native maybe interprets sometimes as anything that runs in containers, and you can have a container deployment in any data center and not necessarily in the cloud. It can be an on-prem, I don't know, cluster of Kubernetes, and basically that may be considered by some folks as cloud native, but it's a very specific case. I think that because of the nature of containers and how they are fault tolerant and highly available and elastic and all these things that are basic, all these factors that are basically associated with the cloud, they run much better in a cloud environment or context than they would ever do in an on-prem deployment kind of case. So yes, you can have containers deployed anywhere, even on a on-prem data center, but yeah, I wouldn't say they are cloud then. They may be using some capabilities from the cloud in any case, connecting to APIs or something that is running on the cloud. And this is why there is this type of articles around that are very, very specific.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalia. Barbara, I hope
Yeah,
that's answered enough.
yeah, thank
We don't have
you.
time to go into all the details. There's so much to talk about, and you all have been amazing. So thank you everyone for listening. Follow the speakers and my co-hosts. If you have questions, I know a lot of you wanted to ask questions. Please just tweet at them, and they will try their best to answer. So thank you, Natalia, Salma, Mastia, Nitia, and Savannah that had to go on time. So
Thank you
bye.
so much for having us. And thanks to all the speakers for being here. Thank
Yeah,
you, Kelly.
thank you. Sure. You all are amazing. Bye bye, everybody.
Bye.